My name is Peter Mitchell. Peter Christian Mitchell to be precise, for reasons that will soon become chillingly evident. My entry into this world was about as inauspicious as entries get. My parents had met while working at the BBC, fallen in love, as parents do, and married, when they quickly and lovingly engaged in the parental duties of starting a family. I was the first of two byproducts of those parental duties, arriving on March 16, 1968 in Princess Louise Hospital in the Kensington district of London, a relatively nice place to enter the world. In October of that year we emigrated to Canada and eventually settled in Hamilton, Ontario, where my father climbed the ink-stained media ladder to become an award-winning business editor for the Hamilton Spectator. My mother, when she wasn't being unceremoniously dragged into the daily dramatics provided by my younger sister and myself, also eked out a successful career in freelance journalism in a wide range of areas. Our den was filled to bursting with files and photos relating to mercenaries, wrestlers, Jack the Ripper, and the paranormal. Scooby-Doo was educational programming in our household. There are no such things as ghosts, only people trying to make money, was a lesson learned at the same time Big Bird was teaching the ABCs. My mother's most notable accomplishment was uncovering the all-too-human machinations behind the spectral apparitions of Borley Rectory, known for decades as the most haunted house in England. 40 years later the members of the Borley Tourism Committee still haven't forgiven her. Rest in peace, Mum. Ghostbusting aside, it was a fairly normal, nondescript, stereotypically bland Canadian childhood. My teenage self may disagree, but it was relatively free of the drama and trauma that teenagers love to wallow in. Friends moved away. Pets died. I had surgery on an ingrown toenail. I failed my driver's examination on my first attempt. And my second. I sometimes wonder if I only passed on my third effort because the instructor feared the possibility of getting into a moving vehicle with me ever again. It was hardly Catcher in the Rye material, just the typical journey through the standard rites of passage we all pass through as we enter the great global tribe of humanity. I reached adulthood, joined the tribe, and worked my way through university to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree in English literature, essentially spending 4 years and thousands of my father's dollars proving to the world I could read. Big Bird had done his job well, free of charge. I eventually followed in my father's footsteps, bumbling my way through a moderately successful career in business journalism. Though I served as editor for 2 local business magazines for a few years, there were no awards coming my way. It wasn't quite my cup of tea, and I was merely treading water until my proverbial ship came in. Evidently, as we all discover, that ship has yet to leave port. Researching an article on corporate social responsibility and the philanthropic role local business leaders were playing in alleviating social issues caught my interest. It prompted me to start exploring a long-forgotten philanthropist in our family's history, Sir John Kirk. As secretary and director of the Ragged School Union, John championed the rights of children, the disabled, and the working poor in Victorian London. My early research indicated his influence extended far beyond London's city limits, and his life proved far more interesting than previous biographies revealed. I had even discovered an obscure link between my illustrious ancestor and Jack the Ripper that had escaped the notice of the most ardent ripperologists, including my mother. Inspired by this and other salacious family revelations, I dove headfirst into the writing of A Night in the Slums, a self-confessed sanity-vanity project that quickly took over my life and ultimately lured me down the path to self-destruction. Call it ego, call it a midlife crisis, call it what you will, I pursued this dream project with a passion and foolhardiness that saw the dream eventually descend into nightmare. In early 2017 my 50th birthday was looming uncomfortably on the horizon, teasing me with the absence of any substantial accomplishments in a half-century of living. My father had won awards. My mother had unraveled the spectral shenanigans of England's most haunted house. Sir John had achieved worldwide respect and accolades for his work among the destitute. Even my grandfather, Frank Mitchell, had earned an OBE for his work as the press and information officer for the British Embassy in Washington, D.C., annoying the Beatles in the process. I hadn't even raised a cactus with any degree of success, and with the big 5-0 staring me in the face it was weighing heavily. A Night in the Slums was my midlife sports car, my one chance to leave some kind of legacy to the world so I wouldn't be forgotten in the years after I departed it. To complete the research, I had to return to those same London slums John Kirk once walked. So that is just what I did, with the minimum of preparation, blinded by the light of my dream. I did have a precedent from my own distant past I was using as a template. I had moved to England in 1999 for a period of 2 years with practically no groundwork laid ahead of time. I had been able to find accommodation and employment with relative ease and was firmly established within a matter of weeks. It worked then, I reasoned. There was no reason it shouldn't work again. But I was much older now. England was older now. And as I would soon discover, England today shares more in common with the England of Sir John's youth than with mine. On March 16, 2017, my 49th birthday, I called the British government to obtain my national insurance number from previous employment records. I was informed that information could not be provided over the phone. That was reasonable enough, so I asked if she would mind pulling my file to see if there were any potential issues I should know about. She happily agreed and after a few moments replied,
"Oh yeah, here you are. No problems."
She cheerily wished me a safe voyage and disconnected, eager to take her next call. She had lied. She had not called up my file at all, for as it later transpired, there was no file to retrieve. It wasn't the first bald-faced lie I had been told by an employee of Her Majesty's Civil Service, and it likely won't be the last, but it was the innocent lie on which all future events hinged. Had I known ahead of time the problems that were about to emerge, I would never have booked my flight. I arrived in London May 28, 2017, settled into the travel hostel I had booked, purchased a mobile phone and a laptop, and started putting the wheels in motion to start the exciting new voyage before me with a king-of-the-world confidence that proved more hubristically prophetic than anyone could have guessed. Some time passed before a slightly disturbing thought crept into my mind. The wheels weren't moving. After days of phone calls and emails, I finally discovered why. The government had no proof I existed. The reason eventually given was the hospital where I had been born, the Princess Louise, had closed, and the records had been lost. It did not explain how I was able to obtain my passport 3 years previously, but the response to that query was stone-cold silence. There was one more little complication that proved the iceberg to my Titanic. The government seemingly had no proof I existed, but it had ample proof of the existence of another Peter Mitchell. A sex offender. The worst kind of sex offender, a pedophile. The little digital nanobots in Her Royal Majesty's computer systems put 2 and 2 together and came up with 5. The result, I now had pride of place on the sex offender registry. Wherever he may be in that great beyond, the ghost of George Orwell snorted coffee through his nose at that little twist of bureaucratic fate. One of the many perks in being classified as sex offender is your placement on the no-fly list. Those little digital nanobots are nothing if not efficient, even when their math doesn't add up. Barring a long swim, I couldn't return to Canada. I contacted the Canadian High Commission on Trafalgar Square and discovered to my horror that I had not just become a victim of my own midlife ego, but of my nonchalant apathy towards the life I had been living across the Atlantic. Though I had lived in Canada for the majority of my 49 years, I had never obtained Canadian citizenship. I saw no need. It was costly, time-consuming, and had only affected my ability to vote, not something I considered a high priority as I cynically felt my one little vote didn't make any difference at all in the greater scheme of things. It turns out the greater scheme meets indifference with indifference. The Canadian High Commission couldn't help me because I wasn't a Canadian citizen. End of story. The nice gentleman on the phone wished me luck and disconnected, eager to take his next call. Fortunately, I still had my original birth certificate, my recent passport, my Canadian driver's license and, of all things, my Burlington Public Library card to prove to the powers that be that A. the person sitting in front of them did exist despite the assertions of their databases to the contrary, and B. the records of every book, DVD, Blu-ray, CD, and magazine I had ever borrowed from the Burlington Public Library, ultimately proving I was not in England at the time of the offenses. It seems the only way to survive in our brave new world is to fight databases with databases. It was touch and go for a while, but the Burlington Public Library database emerged victorious. Hallelujah. While this mess was being sorted, I rented temporary accommodation in the Bayswater area, just a 5-minute walk from the flat my parents were renting when I was born. I explored the area extensively, sharing photos with my father back in Canada while he shared the memories they inspired. I put the job search on the back burner and spent weeks in the British Library taking photographs of the hundreds of documents they possessed relating to John Kirk and his work for later transcription. I also emptied my meager savings and began paying for rent and basic living expenses with my Canadian credit card. I had no choice at the time. The matter was resolved quite quickly, but when the option to return to Canada briefly became available, I fell victim to my third liability, pig-headed stubbornness. I could have returned. In hindsight, I should have returned. Friends and family had generously offered to help with the flight, resettlement, and rebuilding. But I didn't take advantage of the opportunity to go back. Before arriving in England, I had spent over 5 years gathering research and making preliminary notes for A Night in the Slums. I had thousands of pages of documentation but needed more. Returning to Canada would force me to discard the project for good, and my only legacy would be an aborted attempt at my magnum opus, abandoned at the first hurdle. I reasoned, not entirely without merit, that I had simply had a run of bad luck that had amounted to nothing more than a detour on the path to success. That luck had surely changed, and turning back now would be turning my back on the opportunities I was finally free to pursue. I would spend the rest of my life filled with regret, wondering what could have been. And truth be told, I was annoyed at Canada. I felt, rightly or wrongly, that the country I had contributed to for 49 years had cavalierly turned its back on me in my hour of need over a piece of paper. I was a mere permanent resident as opposed to a Canadian citizen, and in my state of mind at the time that distinction meant my contributions to the country meant nothing, that my life had meant nothing. I was in no hurry to return with my tail between my legs. So I stayed. Foolishly, I stayed. Employment remained stubbornly out of reach, but I kept calm. My available credit shrank, yet I carried on, my debt rising to frightening levels. I eventually surpassed my limit and my card was cancelled. The inevitable outcome had not just appeared over the horizon, it was barreling towards me with frightening speed. I could see it, I could hear it, I could smell the disaster about to claim me, but I couldn't believe it was happening. I faced the catastrophe head-on, not from any sense of courage, but from a numbing sense of disbelief. Disaster struck, and life, as I had known it, changed forever. Ego. Apathy. Obstinacy. Denial. Play those cards right and you can be elected a leader of the free world. Play them wrong and, well, that's how I, a self-confessed middle-class twit from Canada, wound up homeless on the streets of London. And that was only the beginning.